Good evening. It's great to see you. Hopefully you've got Haggai open, or if not, then you've got a little sheet of paper with it on. You'll need that, that's good. Now I wonder, have you ever taken a selfie? Do you know what a selfie is? It's a picture of yourself and something that's important to you. Maybe something big that's going on in your life. Maybe something you care a lot about. Maybe something you put a lot of time into, effort into, or money, maybe. We're going to have a go at taking a selfie now, because you guys are so important to me. We're going to try and take one. Bear with me a second. Let's have a look. You should be able to see it as well. Hang on. Let's see if this works. Ready? It will work. Hold on to your hats. It's coming. Ready? Right. That's me. That's you. We're going to try and get as many people in as we can. Apologies if you don't get in. It means you're not important enough. Right. There we go. I need to get in it as well because it's my selfie. Hang on. Try and get my finger not in there. Ready? Oh. Let's try another one. With you guys in as well. All in the front. Look at that. Should we try and look at it? Look at that. It's got all the important people in it. And the most important at the front. Look at that. Now, imagine you had to get all of your life into a selfie. The most important things in your life. The things that next week will take up most of your time. The things that will take up most of your money. The things that you put the most effort into. What would you have in your selfie? What would you have behind you? What would be at the front? You got a picture in your head? Selfies are immediate. They show what you're prioritizing now. So, in your selfie, you should have the things that maybe Monday morning will include, or next Saturday, what you're going to be doing. What's in yours? Maybe it's your other half, or your image. Maybe your nice clothes are in there. Maybe it's your school uniform. Maybe it's your exams that are coming up, or your coursework. You don't want them to be in there, but they need to be. And once they're out the way and out of your selfie, you'll be happy. Maybe it's AFC Bournemouth. Maybe that's been important to you. Maybe you've got you and Eddie Howe in the background in your selfie. Maybe it's your career. You've got your boss in your selfie, in your picture, because he's the one you need to impress. Maybe it's your car. Maybe that's what's important to you, and that's what you spend all your Saturday cleaning. I don't. If you've seen ours, it's not clean. Maybe it's just enjoying yourself, having a good time. You live for the weekend. Maybe it's the fun things that you do, the surfing or your guitar or whatever it is. Maybe it's your mates. You spend all your time trying to find your friends and spend time with them. Maybe it's the grandkids. Are they what make you happy now? Are they in your selfie? I've seen plenty of pictures on Facebook from Lansdowne with grandkids at beach huts and things. Maybe it's all those great things that you do at church, all those really needy people that you help. Maybe they'd be in your selfie. What would you have? Have you got your selfie in your head? Take the picture and hold it there. Because in our passage tonight, God challenges what's in your selfie. He says, what are your priorities and where are they getting you to? What good are they doing? You and God's people. Haggai was a prophet in the Old Testament. It might not be a familiar passage to you, but it's awesome. You'll enjoy it, I promise. Haggai spoke from God to the people. He was the messenger from God to the people at that time. And here he's speaking to them as they've come back to Jerusalem. So 70 years beforehand, Jerusalem had been destroyed. Big war, Babylon came, took over, destroyed the city, houses to rubble, temple, centre of the city, rubble. Some of them taken away, lived in Babylon for 50 years. And then king from Persia, Cyrus, came and took over Babylon. And he said to these Jews that were living in Babylon, go home, go back to Jerusalem, and I'll tell you what, you can go, and I'll pay for the temple to be rebuilt, because I know how important it is to you. So he sent them back, all excited, big wad of cash in their hand, to rebuild the temple. They get back. This is probably about 15 years prior to where we are in Haggai. All excited, start building the temple, put the foundations down. That'll be us soon. And then they got sidetracked. Because if you leave a city for 50 years in rubble, then it's not a nice place to go back to. So they didn't have houses because they would have been a mess in rubble. They didn't have much food because their land had been left for 50 years. And the locals, the other people that had moved in, and the locals around there, were being hard work. So they got sidetracked and got distracted by all these different things. So they'd stopped building the temple, the job they had to do. So God sends Haggai to speak to them and challenges their selfie. He gives them a reality check. He gives them a picture of their life. He paints this picture. And he puts all the important things in there. And he says, is that how you're supposed to be living? Is that what you're supposed to be doing? Is that the job I gave you to do? So that's where we're going tonight. Let's have a look. Get Haggai up. And look at verse 2. And we'll see what we see about their selfie. And then we'll see how that relates to our selfie, the one you've taken and got in your head. So look at verse 2. The first thing we see about the picture of their life is what's not in there. So verse 2 says, this is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say, the time has not yet come for the Lord's house to be built. It's not yet time to rebuild the temple, God's house. So their selfie hasn't got temple. Well, it might be in there actually, but it's probably at the back or at the top there somewhere. You can't see it. It's not at the forefront like Paul was in ours. And that's an issue for Haggai. It's an issue for God. The temple was the holy place. It was the place where God's people were made right, brought back into relationship with God. It reminded them that God had chosen them and brought them out of slavery, fed them when they were hungry, saved them from being destroyed over and over again. Even when they grumbled and turned their backs on him, the temple was the place where they could meet with God. At the temple, the creator of the whole universe, the God in charge of everything, met with them and had relationship with them. So they should have been putting all their time and effort and money into rebuilding that temple. That was their job. Because their whole identity as God's people came from the temple. Their whole life flowed from it. It all centered around the temple. It should have been essential. But as you see in verse 2, it wasn't. It wasn't top of their priority list. The first thing God says is, these people say, the time has not yet come. Time has not yet come. It suggests that they know they're going to do it at some point. One day we'll get round to it. One day we'll rebuild it, but not yet. So what do they do instead? Have a look again. Look down at verse 3. What do they do? And the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your panelled houses, while this house remains a ruin? Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much, but have harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. See what's going on there? Their priorities are all wrong. And God challenges them. He says twice, verse 3 and verse 7. Give careful thought to your ways. Think about what you're doing. Especially my people, think about what you're doing. Look at your selfie, look at the picture. Israelites, think about what you're doing. Other things are getting in the way. Their houses, their food, their drink, clothes, their money. Now, they're all important things. And they would have been fairly important to the Israelites then, because remember, the city was a mess. They needed houses to live in. They needed food to eat. They needed money to buy food to eat, to build their houses. But it doesn't say they're bad things there. It just says, you've got it out of focus. You've got your priorities wrong. Because it's more than just building houses and having food. Look at the language that it's used. It shows that it's much more than just building your house and getting on with life. They're trying to be satisfied and safe and secure in these things. Look how they described the panelled house. You've got panels in your house? Our flat would look odd with panels in. But I imagine, at those times, if you put panels in your house, it's pretty luxurious. So it's not just building a house. They're building really posh houses. They're food. You eat but never have enough. They're eating and eating and eating and eating. You drink and never satisfied. Loads of clothes, but you're never warm. The wardrobes are full. Posh clothes. Hundreds of pairs of shoes, ladies. But they're never warm enough. And money, the wages, they go in the pocket and they're out again. Like purses with holes in. Spending money they don't have. They're trying to be sorted and enjoy themselves rather than doing the job God's given. Do you see that? Their priorities are all wrong. They're using good things, but they're putting them before the temple. They need to make sure they're secure and they're safe. And you see from this that God says when you try and make yourself safe and secure and satisfied without me, it's not going to go well. You'll never find it. You'll never be secure. You'll never be satisfied. And you see how that comes in this passage, the next few verses? You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why, declares the Lord Almighty? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with his own house. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew, and the earth its crops. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains, on the grain, the new wine, the oil, and whatever the ground produces, on men and cattle, and on the labor of your hands. So they were searching for satisfaction away from God. Their worship, their priorities weren't on God, and so he disciplines them with drought. He brings drought on the land. So no food, no oil, no crops. Now we could look at this and see this judgment from God and look around the world and see drought, see natural disasters, see the state of our nation and say, that's God's discipline. That's the application from this. This is God's discipline. I don't think that's quite right, because God is disciplining his nation here, people of Israel, specific people chosen for a specific purpose at a specific time. So here, this drought is descriptive for us, showing the wrong priorities of the Israelites and the effect that has. Instead, what it does show us is that collectively as God's people, when they got their priorities wrong and made excuses, they would never be safe and they would never be satisfied. Let me say that again. When they got their priorities wrong, they would never be safe and never satisfied. They would never feel full, never have enough money, never have a big enough house. And this is ironic, really, because this is God's people we're talking about. He'd chosen them. They should have been feeling secure. Out of all the nations around them, they should have been feeling secure. God had done so much for them. And God reminds them subtly of that here, I think, in this passage. Look how God's referred to. Verse 2, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Verse 5, now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Verse 7, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Verse 9, end of verse 9, declares the Lord Almighty. Yours might say the Lord of hosts or the Lord of angel armies, I think was read. God is reminding them who he is here, how powerful he is, how much he's looked after them, how mighty he is. When they heard the Lord Almighty, they would have looked back over the generations and remembered the times that he'd brought them out of slavery, that he'd fed them when there was no food, that they had been satisfied, when they'd been grumpy and turned away and turned back and he had accepted them. And God says, I, the Lord Almighty, am here. Stop making excuses. Come back to me. Find your satisfaction in me. So, what about us then? Should we be prioritizing a temple? Should we be building a building? Be careful what I say here, shouldn't I? Really? But our priority shouldn't be to be building a physical building. Might surprise you to hear that. But that's not what Haggai is saying here. He's not saying necessarily plough all your money into the building project so you can have a nice shiny building. That's important, don't get me wrong. But that's not what he's saying here. We need to read this through the cross, okay? And we have the benefit of being the side of the cross, don't we? Seeing it through Jesus. And the issue with temple, as we've seen, was that they weren't prioritizing God, that he'd taken a back seat. Now, Jesus is the place where we meet with God. He's the place where we find all our satisfaction and all our safety as human beings. And those two facts should completely transform our priorities. And that means that we should be prioritizing, not building a physical building, but doing the job that Jesus has given us to do. So let's think about those. Jesus is the place where we meet God. They had a temple, which is where they met God. Jesus is the place where we meet him. John chapter 1 starts with an amazing description of Jesus. It says, Jesus the Word is God and has been there from the beginning, and he has made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only. Colossians 1 says something similar. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in Jesus, and through him to reconcile, bring back all things by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. So we don't need a temple, we don't need a place to go. Jesus is the place where we meet the creator of the universe. Jesus is God, come as a man to bring us, to bring you and me back into relationship with God. And he does that through his work on the cross. Peter talked this morning about how when he died, the temple of the curtain was ripped in two. That was a thick curtain, ripped in two, and that was symbolic to show that the holy place and the place where normal people would be were no longer separated. The holy place where God was and the place where people like you and me were could now come together. Jesus is the place where we come together with God. Jesus unblocked the way. All the sin and wrong priorities that you have block us. They stop us getting in the way. Jesus on the cross takes that away. So, when you open the Bible, when we sing tonight, when you pray in college, when you're sat at home thinking about who Jesus is, you are meeting with the creator of the universe. Does that blow your mind? We say it so much here in church, don't we? Let it blow your mind tonight. The creator of the universe wants to meet with you. He doesn't want you to go to a posh building to meet with you. He wants to meet with you in Jesus. God cared enough about us to come down and to die so that we can meet with him. He wants to be in relationship with us. That's awesome. In Jesus, we can see the glory of the one and only. And because we meet the Lord Almighty, the glory of the one and only in Jesus, that means that he is the place where we find all our satisfaction. And we can be totally secure. In your big selfie, I wonder how many of those things look like the Israelites' things. How are you trying to make yourself safe? Or how are you trying to satisfy yourself? Maybe, as we said, it's the exams that you're doing, getting your grades. You need to be secure so you can get your place at university. Or you need to pass your course at uni to make sure you're secure in your career. Maybe it's your money. You spend it to make you happy. Or maybe you spend it on your house to make your life secure. Maybe it's your mortgage, and you're paying your mortgage so that you've got a pension and you're secure. Maybe it's your phone, and that makes you happy. And you sit on Facebook, and the amount of time you spend on Facebook just makes you happy. And you feel secure because you can create the person you want to be online, can't you? That's the great thing about Facebook. You can be whoever you want to be. And be completely secure, completely satisfied. The problem with all those things is that, as Haggai says, it's a bottomless pit. The more money you have, the more money you'll want. The nicer your house, the nicer house you'll want. The better job you have, the better job you'll want. Russell Brand once talked about his celebrity lifestyle and said, it's like a new pair of shoes. You long for them for ages. You see them on the shelf. They look great. And then when you get them, they're all stiff and they don't fit properly. And then they get old and you want the next pair. It's never enough, he said. We will never ever find satisfaction or security in stuff. So that stuff that you put into your selfie, that is never going to make you completely happy. It might make you happy for a bit. The Israelites were probably quite happy with their nice houses. But it's not enough. There is always going to be a drought. You're always going to be let down. You'll always want more. But when we look at Jesus and we put him first as our main priority, at the front of your big life selfie, God makes some big promises to us. He says that you can be completely satisfied in me, and you can be completely safe. God promises to provide everything we need when we live in relationship with him. It says in John 6, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never go thirsty. It says, come to me and I'll give you everything you need. It's not everything you want. You might still never have a house with panels in it. You're not going to be really rich, necessarily. You might be. But he'll give you everything you need. What does that look like? He meets our biggest need. You might think that your biggest need is your house, but it's not. The Bible says that our biggest need is to meet with God. That as we keep searching, the only way that hole will be filled is knowing God. And Jesus makes that possible. And when you're in that relationship with him, do you know you're completely safe? Because nothing can take you out of it. Nothing. You're completely safe. Once you're a child of God, you're always a child of God. You're always in his hands. Your life is always there. Your eternal destiny is safe. And being loved by him, being loved by the creator of the universe, being loved by Jesus, means that you don't have to worry about what other people think or about what job you're going to get next. You can be totally secure in yourself because you're totally loved by God. You're treasured by him. Remember we said he was willing to die for you. So when you get that into perspective with the things that you worry about, you don't need to worry. You still need to work. You still need to do your uni course. You still need to do your job. Don't go to work on Monday and say, Tom said this shouldn't be my priority anymore. You still need to do that. But Jesus needs to be bigger. Because, you see the perspective, he is bigger. He's the Lord Almighty. And it means that we don't need to keep chasing these physical pleasures and satisfaction anymore. Because Jesus is way more exciting than any high you'll ever get, or person you'll ever be with, or car you'll drive, or job you'll have, or amount of money in your wallet. Jesus is way better than that. Blows those out of the water. So it shouldn't be hard to put those things back a bit, because Jesus is so amazing. The picture of Jesus in the Bible is so beautiful. When you meet with him personally and you feel safe, you know that you're with the Creator. That's better than having panels in your houses. It's got to be. So we need to sort out our selfie, sort our priorities out, and put Jesus first. Let's have a look at what happened to the Israelites when they did that. Have a look at verse 12. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the whole remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai. So they saw it and they changed their selfie. They obeyed because the Lord their God had sent him, and the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people. I am with you, declares the Lord. So God says, because you've turned back to me, I'm with you. Notice they haven't done anything yet. They haven't started building yet. God saw their heart, their desire, and he says, I am with you. He met with them. The temple wasn't there. The temple hadn't been built yet. He was supposed to meet with them in the temple. He says, I am with you. When we turn to Jesus, that promises to us as well. God is with us. We meet with God in Jesus. So the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of the whole remnant of the people. They came and began work on the house of the Lord Almighty, their God. So once they'd seen that God was with them, and noticed God stirred them up, God changed their heart. What did they do then? They got on with it. They started building. They started building the temple. Now we've got a job to do. We've already said we haven't got to build a temple. So what is the job that God has got for us? We're his co-workers. We need to work with God in building his church. And again, we said this morning, it's amazing how God brings things together, isn't it? Me and Peter didn't plan this. We talked this morning about how God brings his people together. God announced his mission to Abraham in Genesis 12. He said, I'm going to create a people from all nations, all across the world. And then in Matthew chapter 28, Jesus gives us that job. He says, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them to obey all I've said. So God's big building project isn't a physical one, but it's people. It's his kingdom. So our priority, when we see who Jesus is, should be making disciples. Jesus said, go make disciples, teach them what I've commanded you. So we, that's us, need to be telling people about Jesus and building each other up as disciples. But just like the Israelites, we make all kinds of excuses. Listen to some of these. I need some more training in evangelism before I can go and tell my friends about Jesus. I need to know some more of the answers to the hard questions. It's the minister's job to do the discipling. I've got a small group leader to disciple me. I'll give more money to the church once I've paid off the mortgage and my house is safe. Or I got a promotion. Or I'll have more time for youth group when I've finished my exams. I won't speak to my friends at the moment because it's so busy. Or I'm too young to serve the church now. I'm too young to be building up God's people now. I'll leave that to the older folk. Or maybe I'm too old to be building up the church now. I'll leave that to the younger folk. Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle and you're too busy to be building the church now. The problem with those excuses is that if we don't do it, who is going to do it? I was with some mates this afternoon who don't know Jesus, most of them, and I sat there and looked around and thought, if I don't tell them about Jesus, how are they ever going to hear? If you don't tell your workmates or your schoolmates or your uni friends about Jesus, how are they ever going to hear? Yes, God does the work, but he chooses to work through us. He chooses to use you and me. I bet the Christians here probably became Christians through somebody else telling them. Yeah? We've got a job to do. We need to tell people. And what do we hear from this? Not the excuse of the Israelites. It's not yet time to do it. Now is the time. Now is the time to do it. We need God to stir us up to work now. Not next week or next month or when we've got the building or when I finally get to uni or when I've finished uni or when I've retired or when the kids are grown up. Now is the time. And you might have all these excuses going in your head now because our first thing when you hear a challenge like that is to step back. There's a reason why I'm not doing it. And if it wasn't one of the reasons I've already said, you've probably got a reason why you're not doing it. Let me tell you nicely, now is the time. We've got a job to do. We are the future of the church. We are the future of God's people. And it's immense to be part of that. But you need to feel the responsibility of that, because that's what God says to his people here, and that's what God says to us. We need to get on with it. We need to do something now. So I wonder what that looks like for you. How do you change your selfie? How do you change the way that next week looks? And it's not necessarily just telling people about Jesus. It needs to be that. But go back to what Jesus told us. He said, go and make disciples. He didn't say go and make converts and leave them. Go and make disciples. We need to be building each other up, training each other up. I wonder whether you spend time with your Christian friends, asking them how they're getting on. How are your priorities this week? How did you get on with that thing you're really struggling with? How can I pray for you? We need to get on with that as well. That might seem like small, little things. We need to get on with it. Because a lot of the time it's little things that don't happen because they seem less important. God says here, that's your job. Because again, if you don't do it, if I don't do it, who else is going to do it? Who else is going to ask that friend, Christian friend, how they're getting on? Their boss is going to ask them. They don't care how they're getting on. The kids aren't going to ask them. Small group leader's got loads of people to talk to. The minister's got loads of stuff to do. You need to ask them. You need to pick up the phone and speak to them. You just send a text. How are you using Facebook? Do you just use Facebook to put yourself up there? Use it to send a message to encourage one of your brothers or sisters. It's our job to get that. Now is the time to do it. How are you going to change how you use your money? That's a touchy subject, isn't it? We don't like to be asked about our money. It's my money. How are you going to change how you use your money? It's not your money, it's God's money. God's given it to you. How are you going to change how you use your money this week, this month, this year? How can building the people of God come to the forefront of your bank account? Do you ever try and add up the things in your bank account when you use it, or keep your receipts and have a look? How many of those things are used for building God's kingdom? Or your other resources, your car. How do you use your car? How do you help your kids to build God's kingdom? Now is the time. And now is the time to building God's kingdom in his church, because we get to meet with Jesus. We get to. And we get to find all our security in him and all our satisfaction. So that should completely transform what your selfie looks like. I'm going to pray. Before I do, just spend some time thinking about what your selfie now looks like, what that picture of your life changes into. If you haven't met Jesus before, tonight he offers to meet with you. Do you want to meet with him? Pray now and ask him to come and meet with you. Lord, we thank you that we get to see so clearly here that you want to meet with us, that you want to know us, that you want to be in relationship with us. Lord, stir our hearts tonight. Show us the priorities that we've got that are wrong. Show us how our picture is out of focus. Show us how we can bring you to the forefront. Lord, help us to worship you in everything that we do. Help us to be more satisfied in you than we ever have before. Help us to feel safer tonight in your presence than we ever have before. And Lord, we pray that you would stir us to action as we leave from here this evening. Use us to bring people to you, to encourage each other as your people, to be making disciples. Because, Lord, we want to put you first tonight. We want our selfies to be taken over by the glory of the one and only.